Welcome back to the Dream Together podcast. We're so glad to have our team here today. John Mark Hart down on my end here, Lee Rowland, and our new guest on the panel, Kori Hall. Kori Hall is our millennial warrior. Makes me feel young just sitting next to her.
Amen.
I need sometimes that youthful affirmation. Y'all, I'm excited to talk about our topic today, which is defeating division in America. And so we want your thoughts. So just, comment if you're watching this on YouTube or, help drive this conversation with us. But the question is, what does it take to defeat division in America? We're going to do a series called Be the Dream. And we want you to take away practical solutions, whether you are in a place of influence and you can actually change things at a systemic level, or if you're an everyday father or mother, or you're someone who is saying, I want to be a part of the solution. Let's jump right into it. I want to leave it open-ended right now, and I want to ask the first person who would just like to jump in here and say, this is what we need to do to defeat division in America. Where do we start? I think the senior on the team is getting all of the eyes.
I looked at Lee.
I felt these eyes on me. I think a great place to start with eradicating division is for people to get proximate with one another. Mm-hmm. And that just simply let me converse with someone that doesn't look like me, doesn't believe like me, and I'm just interested in hearing what they have to say. So this great book that I like to read called the Bible just simply says, listen. And so before we speak, and I think that's a great place to start to eliminate division. A well-known psychologist really got a lot of traction with his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in this book, all of us know about this habit. It says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think that's what successful leaders, he says, do. This is, the book sold over 20 million copies. I'm probably well under the number. But look at that principle. Look at that practice of us seeking to understand, hey, what's my kid really saying? What's my spouse really saying? What is my neighbor saying? And it does a couple things. Just automatically, it lets that person know that you value what I think. You care about me. So already we're drawing closer to each other. We're eliminating division. Just you acting like you care what's on my mind. You care what's on my heart. And then after you hear it, we may find that we really agree more than we disagree. And so as an educator, as a minister, a pastor, I've seen this happen time and time again. The couple really, there was very little that they disagreed about, but they didn't talk about it. They didn't take the time to listen to one another. So I think America, Oklahoma, we can we can close a lot of the division by seeking just first to understand and listen to another person's story. And
and that's so good. You guys just jump in here as we go. But when I hear listen before you speak, it makes me think about the whole kind of framework of where we're at right now, where it's like our statements are going to identify us with one side or the other. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like if I agree with you, I'm saying I agree with everything that you say. And it's like I could almost hear people listening to what you say. Well, I don't need to hear what you think about if I know you voted for so-and-so, or if I know that you didn't kind of agree fast enough when I made this statement. I think the context that we're in is keeping us in a shallow place. Mm-hmm. What do you say to the person who knows their neighbor is in a different political party or has some type of belief or even a religious belief that's just like almost opposing to where they stand? How do they mingle what you said to seek to understand before you seek to be understood and to listen before you speak? Just give us a little bit more.
Gladly. I don't believe that my neighbor and I sitting on the porch, just chopping it up or eating a meal together, just chopping it up. I don't believe that division is going to stay where it is or get worse. I believe it's actually going to we're going to draw us closer when I sit down and hear your story. The young man recently, it's been a year ago, I forgot his name, but he came to Oklahoma City. He shared his story about his mom that was killed at the church and murdered in South Carolina. And now he travels all over the country, and he simply says, people, listen to what he strongly encourages. Listen to the other person's story. I believe that when we look at the humanity of our neighbor and hear their story, it draws us closer. I'm a university adjunct professor, and one of the things that I strongly encourage my future principals and superintendents to do is simply be vulnerable, be transparent. When you do that, it draws people closer to you. I'll share this with you. In a small class that I taught, every one of 6 of the 7 students had suffered some real, I don't know if you all heard me or not, some real life-changing, altering challenges growing up. What it did to the class is it just drew the class closer. I care about you now, Kori, because I heard your story. There's a God-given empathy that we have with pain, and we relate to it. Well, I recently saw a boxing match. There were people, a whole bunch of people in my home watching a boxing match. This one boxer was getting pummeled, and everyone in the house said, stop the fight. Even the people that were for the other guy, stop the fight. We don't want to see somebody get hurt. I don't believe that we want to see harm brought to people. But when I don't listen to your story, I don't really care. If I don't know you, I don't really care. When I know you as a person, and I know that your blood is red, and I know that you get hot and you get cold, I really can have natural empathy for you. But if I don't know you, don't know your story, I'm more prone to just really not care.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I think what Lee is saying is getting proximate with someone is how you know their story. And I think what I'm experiencing is people are not getting proximate and they don't want to. And the reasons are varied, but many of them center around fear. And if you have a fear of other because they're different, then you are not going to get close enough to hear their story. I think about the fact that, all around the world, we have countries that have borders and people live in relative peace in those countries with those other borders until they think that someone is encroaching or trying to come and take their resources or trying to change their way of life. And then we have war. And so even in the spaces of division in America, there is this phenomenon that happens where I can't just say that you live your life differently from me, or you look different, or you act different, or have a different culture, and you're there and I'm here and we're equal. There's this fear that you're going to encroach your culture, your beliefs, your standards, your way of living on mine, and then I'm going to have to defend myself. And so people often take the posture of defense, and you can't hear another person's story when you're trying to be defensive, when you're looking for spaces in their story that are going to come against you and what you believe. And so one of the things I've even noticed just driving around my neighborhood is how many people have yard signs that give you an upfront view of what they believe. It's like defend America or love is love. And those are statements, but they don't actually show you their actions. And you can't experience another person's actions and emotions towards you unless you're proximate, like Lee said. And so I feel like when it comes to division, we have to, one, recognize that there is division, because oftentimes we live in a space where we separate ourselves so much from other people and other cultures that we can live in our own protected, barricaded bubble, and we're not experiencing what everybody else out in the world is experiencing. Or we get on the other side where we live our whole life in the space of everything is divided, everything is terrible, there are no solutions. And we have to be able to come to this middle ground where we recognize that there's division, and we recognize that the enemy on the outside is not the only one causing the division, that the divide has to be bridged from both sides. And so I have to take personal responsibility to find the ways that I am upholding that division, even if I'm not causing it, while the other person also takes responsibility for how they're upholding it, even if they're not causing it. Because no one says they're the cause. It's always the other person that's the cause of the division. But in order to bring unity, we both have to recognize the spaces where we can merge together. And I think that's the space where in MLK's dream, it feels very much like there's pieces over here and pieces over here, and they're going to zipper together so well. And we know that that was not the case. And that's not the case now, unless we both see the gaps in our own spaces and can figure out how to merge those things together.
If I can just follow up on what Kori and Lee are saying with a few practical steps. We do tend to have lives in which we surround ourselves with people who like the things that we like. Okay. And there's been a lot said and written about the fact that social media and digitally mediated communities make that easier. The algorithm can sort us out to people who agree with us and like the things that we like. But it's also a reality that our world is increasingly globalizing. It's increasingly diverse. So most people among our listeners, really, if we start opening our eyes and looking around, there's somebody at your workplace, in your neighborhood, at your place of worship. There's somebody who's different than you. It could be ethnically different than you. It could be they have a different political affiliation. It could be they come from a different socioeconomic status. And just the real simple step that I would encourage is just invite somebody to a meal or with a group. Let's go get lunch together on lunch break. Let's go get lunch after church or whatever it may be. And something about table fellowship, just sitting together around food, allows natural relationship to grow. And then when you get there, I think you were talking about that fear factor. Social anxiety is a real thing for a lot of us, but especially if I'm not comfortable with you, if I think you might misunderstand me, if I don't want to offend you, that can be there. But I just think a real simple tactic is just be curious and start asking questions. If you ask, like, tell me about your family, usually that'll get people going. What are you interested in? To asking about hobbies, just being attentive. And if they say something, ask about that. Now, questions that you don't necessarily want to start with is, explain to me the entire collective experience of your ethnic group. So for example, I've sat down for lunch with each of you and nobody's ever said, explain to me white people, sort it all out for me. So, but I think that if we're just being curious about each other as individual human beings, that then we have an opportunity to get to know each other better. I would add to that this other piece. In America right now, if we're talking about defeating divisions, we know there's this phenomenon that's being discussed that we call polarization, or we call tribalism. And I think it's just a reality. If we analyze that for a second, then maybe that can help us think about how do we be part of the solution. And it's a reality that we as human beings think of our individual identity in relation to a group identity, right? If I'm thinking about who I am as a person, I'm going to identify that with a group, whether it's fit my family or a sport that I identify with, or a kind of music I identify with, or a political orientation, or a religious faith, or whatever it may be. We identify as part of a group. And then group identity, we often identify ourselves, we are like this, not like that, or we are these people, not those people. That's just like a sociological, psychological fact of how humans think about identity. I don't know that we can change that, but we can think about how we do it. So when we're identifying what groups we're a part of, we don't have to demonize the other. Mm-hmm. So I think one thing, if we just think right now, if I'm in conversations with people today in the world and we start talking about politics, most people as soon as they start talking about a person, an individual who is an elected official from whatever group they don't identify with, starts using very disrespectful language, the tone becomes very mocking and derisive. I just think, what if we just switched it, saying like, okay, if I'm going to talk about somebody who's from the other party, I'm going to take personal responsibility to be respectful in my language, even if I'm critical. I'm going to look for something positive to say before I start critiquing. And I'm going to say President so-and-so rather than saying president about the president I like and using a disrespectful derogatory term about the person I don't like, right? So just a respectful way of communicating. I try to always have in my back pocket a few nice things I can say about a few elected officials from each party. So that if I start talking to somebody from that party, I can say some affirming things first, in a way that just tears down that tendency to demonize. So I think that's one thing. We each of us have to self-police. We're not going to demonize people that are from a different group with us. And I was talking about politically, but I think religiously the same thing applies. And ethnically the same thing applies. Don't demonize people from a different group. Be respectful. I think on a related note, the stories that we tell, the narratives that we tell, shape how we think about our community, the people that we identify with. And in America right now, I think we have some fights going on about how do we tell the story of our nation. Some people who are very patriotic have a story about telling our nation that the United States of America is the solution for the problems of the world, and anybody who criticizes America is wrong. Other people have a way of telling the story of America that emphasizes America's sins. I just think we can tell a more nuanced and redemptive story in which we're honest about what's beautiful and what's ugly about our country. And we can tell stories that hopefully give us a trajectory to move towards healing, where people from different backgrounds, different communities can find ways to work together, as opposed to stories that are just silencing the narratives that other people tell to help understand their community. So there's a few more thoughts to add to the mix.
That's good. When you mentioned not demonizing people, I also thought about not assigning motives when you're talking about conversations that you're having with people. Oftentimes, if I see a person make a decision that I don't agree with, I assign a motive of why they made that decision. And typically the motive is because they don't like me, or they don't want to see me thrive, or they don't like people who look like me or act like me or whatever it is. And we assign a specific motive. And I've had so many conversations in recent years with people who are in leadership and power. And I ask, like, why was that decision the decision you arrived at? And as they explain to me their reasoning, all of my motives that I thought that they were operating under were not there. They were not a part of their thought process or the conversation. And too often we assign motives of why we think people did the thing that they did. And then it then creates a barrier for us to actually engage with them in any other way moving forward. So when you said, like, have a couple of nice things in your pocket to say about people, there is something to that, because it helps us break down us knowing who we think they are versus us actually engaging with who they are. And I don't want people assigning motives to me, but I do it to them. And so I think that's a big piece of, what even it says in the scriptures about the heart. We don't know the heart, and we want to, but if we assign motivation to somebody else's heart and their decisions and thinking, then it puts us at an even larger space for division and polarization and tribalism.
I just want to add one thing. I think both of you all mentioned it. I know Kori mentioned it, but I don't want for people to clog up ears before I say this, but I think we need to be very, very careful with signage and messaging images that we wear or that we put on our bumper stickers or in our cars or whatnot. I think we need to be very careful about that, because that makes a person make these assumptions about who you are, and that can be a major, major misrepresentation of who you really, really are if they get to know you. And so one of the things I try to do in the community that I live in, I'm new to this community, I'm trying to be very, very intentional about letting people know that I'm someone that values you, and I'd like for you to get to know me. And I think when we, as a practical step of trying to help people close this gap, it's who are you? Who am I? And I don't think you're going to dislike me if you know who I am. But if you see this hat or you see this shirt or whatever, you might make some assumptions. First of all, get to know me. Let me get to know you. We might both want to wear this hat at this point, or never wear this hat, because I really think America, Oklahoma, if we want to close this this division, we're going to have to be intentional versus accidental. It's not going to happen that way. Messaging, again, I don't use social media to try to message who I am and what I believe. What we know from research, social media is the poorest way to communicate and influence. Next is email. Next is texting. Personal conversation is the best way for me to call Kori and let Kori know my feelings, my thoughts, something I disagree with. It allows us, and if at all possible, we meet and talk over a meal. We meet and talk face to face, chop it up, and we get a chance to have the body language, which some say is 75% of our communication. But the social media, I will not. My family suffered a loss recently. I used social media. I didn't. I had somebody else to do it for me. I had social media to let the community know we suffered this loss. That's how I chose to use that. I'm not going to use that platform personally to let people know what I believe. Yeah. I can influence them by my behavior, by my conversation with them one-on-one. I believe we got to give a serious look to watching how we message. And
I think we need to update our context, because there was a day, I believe there was a day, maybe my history is maybe a little shady, but wasn't there a day when you could be a Democrat or Republican and you sat down at a table and laughed at the other person, like, how in the world are you on that side? This is the right side. Yeah. You ordered your food together. You sat down together. Your families knew each other. And in some cases, maybe the husband was a Democrat and the wife was a Republican. But there was just a day when that tension wasn't so great. And I think, when I say updating our context, it's like, okay, today it's not the same.
Yeah.
If you identify like politically first, you may be giving up your opportunity to get to the table. So how can a person handle that? And I just want to throw it out this way. I love the American experience that you're supposed to have the liberty to think. And when I hear you all say, let's listen first, let's seek to understand, what I hear you saying is, okay, if that person is in a different political party, I at least want to know why or what they're reaching for when they are going after something. But today the context is so polarized. Yes. I think let's just have a little bit of dialogue about just being aware that we don't have the tables and we're trying to rebuild that middle ground. So it's almost like if you brought up your favorite football team, one person says, okay, I live in Norman. I'm going to root for the Sooners. But I'm in Oklahoma, so I still love the Cowboys. My nephew works for the OSU Cowboys. But first, I'm a Sooner. So when I get into a similar space with my nephew, I can't wait to take a jab at him. There's going to be some type of crimson joke. It's coming, right? Now, I know politics aren't a joke. It's our future's connected to it. I think a lot of fears are connected to it. But just help me out with that part of the conversation, that the context has shifted and someone's saying in their head, I'm not going to be ashamed of saying my party. I'm part of this party. I voted for someone. That's my American right. And they go in with that, but they never get to a table. What can we do?
Well, I'll throw in a few thoughts. I think historically, there's a lot of reasons why we're experiencing polarization. And a lot of people who have spent much more time than me thinking about that and researching that are writing reasons. But to start at a very simple level, our technology has had a big impact. The moment where we went from radio presidential debates to TV presidential debates is a moment that has been written about a lot. We went from more substantive-oriented conversations to more image-driven elections. And then when we went from television to social media, it's like our attention span has gotten shorter. We're just going for the soundbite. 90 seconds is too long. We need something shorter. And, 30 seconds isn't very much time to faithfully represent my opponent's view in the best way possible and then give a substantive critique of it, So then we get to social media and likes and retweets and all those things that are involved with it, and cable news. And this is an industry that rewards polarizing language. So a headline never says so-and-so won the debate. It says so-and-so murdered so-and-so in the debate. So-and-so, it has to be the strongest language possible to get a click. Sure. So that's been part of the shift. And I think one of the things that we need to do is to make a really intentional effort to celebrate the virtues of civility and to celebrate civil leaders who can be peacemakers.
Oh, John Mark, that's so rich. I don't want to cut you off, but I remember thinking to myself, the only way you can run for president today is either you are the Dow or the face of a party, or you're a billionaire. Mm-hmm. Because if you can't win the image battle, you're not getting in.
Right. And then the rest of us are soaking that up, and it's becoming our discourse. It's becoming our scripts. But if you think about who are the heroes, Martin Luther King Jr., somebody we've talked about almost every episode of this podcast, one of the things he was so great at was bringing together conservatives and liberals or progressives, bringing together Christians and Jews and atheists and Muslims, people from different backgrounds, and showing respect to people that were a part of a different community. The virtues of civility are what humility, a way of saying, Dr. King talked constantly about loving your neighbor and loving your enemy. Even if I disagree with somebody, and even if I don't just disagree, but even if they're disrespectful towards me, I'm going to honor their dignity as a person and invite them, keep inviting them to a different and better kind of relationship. Think about somebody like Abraham Lincoln in our history. Whatever we may think about various policy decisions he made, he was magnanimous. Win or lose, he's going to be respectful to people who are on the other side. So I think thinking through what are those virtues, the humility, the love, the patience, the respect, that tend towards civility, and how do we celebrate the heroes who do that and not celebrate and honor a way of doing political discourse that's always looking to dunk on somebody and get the gotcha moment.
I think what you're saying is so important. A lot of those leaders that we look back at and honor, the things that we're honoring about them are their writing, letters and speeches that they put together that had some weight because there was some time put into those thoughts. I'm sure there were many drafts of letter to Birmingham jail before there was one that was given. And I think right now what you're talking about with social media is people take the most immediate emotional thought they have and publish it. And that thought is now truth, versus giving myself some time to really think through, is this the most clear and helpful way for me to get my point across? And then taking some time to write that down and put it out. I have a 90-second reel or a 120-character post to say what I think about something. The other piece of that is we take those sound bites with the same weight and depth as we would a letter or a book, and they don't have the same weight. I think what you mentioned earlier about politics is a matter of life and death in the sense that the political decisions we make do affect the people around us. And for us to say that they don't would be to miss the fact that we have an opportunity when laws are being passed to change the very fabric of how our society operates. But at the same time, conversations about politics are not life and death, but people often treat them like they are. And so me as a person who's one party having a dinner with a person from another party now to me feels like I'm coming to the table with the enemy, or I'm putting myself in risk or in harm's way, versus I don't have to get all of the things done in this dinner table conversation. But if I go into it with the assumption that I need to change their mind or dunk on them and make sure that they know that I'm right and they're wrong while we eat this chicken, then I'm coming in with the wrong intention.
I need to slow something down here because y'all keep talking about dunking on somebody like it's something negative. And I'm about to start taking this personal.
Some of us have been on the receiving end of those dunks more than giving in basketball career.
I just wanted to get that off my chest.
I was always just trying to take
this
a charge.
This is millennial speak.
Real fast. Dunking on someone is a beautiful thing. And keep that in our society. I do want to add that let's reintroduce an idea that Dr. King had as a part of his 4-part framework. Before he got to nonviolent resistance, one of the goals was self-examination. And so before they would try to collaborate, they would see if they had the conversation, but there was also a portion called self-examination. And I love that piece because it's saying, I respect someone else enough, and I respect the words in my own mouth enough to take the time and say, have I fully gained the picture of what's going on? And am I willing to pay the price, not just to win for my side, but how can I make a win for the whole conversation? And that's what I love about self-examination. They actually would, before they would march, they would set it up and they would spit and they would curse you out and call you the N-word and they beat on you a little bit and say, this is what you're about to walk into. Are you ready for this? But the goal being putting a circle around everyone, they were taking the posture of nonviolence because it was also an invitation to a plane of what he would call brotherhood, where everybody stood on an equal plane. And I think if we could reintroduce this idea of self-examination with the goal of the whole community, I think we're stopping at saying, I'm putting my idea out so I can be a champion voice for my side. I'm putting my idea out so I can win. And I got to humble myself right now and say this, I'm putting it out so I can show everybody how well I can dunk on somebody else.
I think American culture moves past self-examination into self-actualization as one of our values. Achievement, individualism, and self-actualization are the American goals. And we see that all across our culture in so many ways. And none of those things of themselves are bad, but individualism without thinking about how that individual fits into community is bad. And if you think about self-actualization without self-examination, what are you trying to actualize? It's goals created by what you don't want to be. And I think that if I first examine myself, what it is I believe, what it is that I see in myself that needs to grow and change, I can actualize into a person that actually models the things I really want my life to look like versus saying, I want to make sure that I'm not those things or like those people. But we have a goal of self-actualization, the individual determination to succeed and achieve. And it's really difficult. Like in the last 2 years, I've been spending a lot of time working with resettled refugees. And as they're trying to sort out how to live in a society that is so different from the one that they've come from, as they learn about American culture and values, the things that they notice and point out about our society give me a lot of pause. And some of it is so simple, but the thing that keeps coming up is you have so many unspoken rules. You have so many unspoken rules. You know, I will tell them, like, when you're driving in a car, this is what you're supposed to do. And they say, but people don't do that. And I said, well, it's the law. We're supposed to. They're not going to. You don't speed, but everybody is speeding. Yeah, follow the flow of traffic. Well, that's not the law. And so it's like, if we have a society built on all of these unspoken rules, unspoken goals, but then what we're saying are the American goals and the American things that bring us together, but we're living in a different method, it's so difficult for people to know how to move forward together. And so we individualize and try to move forward on our own.
I think you framed that really, really well.
I agree.
That a part of what America has done is that we've individualized. Since we mentioned dunking, since I really feel comfortable now as someone who is 6'7", I'm having flashbacks of Norwalk High School.
Okay.
And that's where I played ball. Norwalk Warriors, go Norwalk Warriors. And one of our rivals was the Johnston Dragons. And, that was one of my favorite teams to play. We walked in the gym, and when they introduced us, their student section stood up the whole time and supported their team. And they were outdoing our students. And when they introduced us, all of the students had brought newspapers, and they put newspapers up and turned their backs to us. And they were hyped the whole game. Now, I love my team, and they beat us the first game. I will say they called bad fouls on me. That's another story. But the second game, we got them back. I love that team because of how their students supported them. I didn't expect them to cheer for me. I didn't expect them to be excited that I could play ball. If I blocked a shot, like they were supposed to flip teams and cheer for me, lie about it, call it a foul, right? Something happened. They got me on the bench quick. But so we were in the same conference. And so when we were playing, our student section cheered for Norwalk. Their student section cheered for Johnston. But I think what we also have to define is, okay, once we got to our conference or to 2A, which is what our teams were, now we were all on the same team. And so some of my closest friends coming out of high school were actually on that team. And now we were on an all-star team together. And the same fervor that we had against each other, we now had together. Mm-hmm. And it's like in society today, I think people are saying, oh, you want me to throw away the fact that I'm an individual and I have distinct values from you. No, I think we need to say, have your distinct values, yes. But man, let's talk about being American. Let's talk about being a community. What's the name of your neighborhood? Be a wonderful we. Let it be as beautiful as possible. Work together. And we're working against some of the schisms where we're trying to be communities and we're not giving space for any us's. And I think a lot of the details we talk about today would almost be inherent if I looked at the thems as though they were an us.
If I could just follow up on that, Clarence, I think that's so good. And I think one of the things that we probably need to highlight more in this conversation is that being a peacemaker and a unifier doesn't mean that you don't have personal convictions that you think are worth fighting for.
Yeah.
Like you can have those convictions, but it really is about how do I respect and love people who disagree with me, and how do I find common ground? We may disagree about 80% of things, but if we agree about 20%, let's start there. And then we can fight about the other 80% from a place of respect and love. And, connecting that back to the issue of self-examination that Kori and Clarence were talking about earlier, I think one word that has gotten a lot of traction in America that I think is good, and maybe we could explore a little further, is vulnerability. A lot of our talk on TED Talks, in books, and there's a lot of influencers that talk about the importance of vulnerability. I think that's valuable. But one of the things that I've noticed is that often when people are trying to practice vulnerability, we're telling stories about how we've been hurt that are difficult to share. That can be part of the healing process. Stories about our trauma. I think it's great that we've destigmatized mental health issues and sharing vulnerable things about those struggles. But one thing I think we haven't started doing yet is making it where we're vulnerable about our own failures. Vulnerable about being wrong. Vulnerable about the ways that I've hurt people. Because we still have this stigma of cancel culture hanging over us. I don't want to be shamed. And I think that, if each of us is just saying, hey, my community is not perfect, so we have core convictions. And I'll just give one example. We've talked a lot about the political divide, but religious divides are a real thing too. So I'm a Christian minister. That's how I came into this work about peace and justice. And for us, I'll say something about my community that listeners who are atheists or Muslims or Buddhists can think about for their own communities. But for us within the Christian community, it is true that we have convictions that we're willing to stand for and fight for and die for and whatever. But we need to hold those with humility and love. And sometimes the lowest hanging fruit for how to get an amen is to, going back to your metaphor, dunk. It's always a sin to dunk on somebody, Clarence. As somebody who's 5'9", I just have to affirm that. But the lowest hanging,
I appreciate it.
the lowest hanging fruit can be to dunk on an atheist or somebody from a different, dunk on secularism. Talk about how this other group has gotten it all wrong, and it's okay to critique from our standpoint. But one of the things I've started doing recently in sermons is I'm most of the time quoting the Bible and quoting Jesus. But if there's a Muslim or a atheist or a Buddhist who has made a similar point, I'll just try and quote that and notice it sometimes, because I want our people to understand we can hold to our core convictions while still respecting and honoring and learning from people who are different than us. And that is a different kind of vulnerability that I think can be a bridge to healing.
But John Mark, that's a rich point. I believe, so we're talking about being the dream. What does it take to get to that tomorrow? And I believe the leaders of tomorrow, this is one of the main points to grab. And that's, respecting someone else's deal breakers. I know what someone's deal breakers are. I simply want to see a lot of changes take place in society across the board. And that means I can invite some people in where I'm like, I know what their deal breaker is. I'm not trying to change them on this topic right now. But I do think there's enough bandwidth for us to figure out how to move the conversation of the unhoused to another level, and we could solve this problem 20 to 30% better, because I know what your deal breaker is, and I'm not gonna just hit that button when the news cameras are on and call you an idiot at the end of it. You already knew where they stood. You already knew what would stir them up. You already knew where they would cross the line with their base. And I think out of respecting others, have some table conversations that aren't on the news. Sit down and ask them, is there any bandwidth around your deal breaker? Because I think if we do X, Y, Z, we can make our neighborhood better. Tomorrow's leaders, I think, out of respect, begin to discover what's my peers' deal breaker and how do I address them now?
I think oftentimes when people step into leadership spaces, because I think leadership has a lot to do with this conversation. If we're moving from division to unity, there has to be some sort of unity among our leaders. But I think oftentimes when leaders try to speak from a place of unity and respecting both parties or respecting different cultural groups, the people from certain cultural groups are like, they don't see me as valuable because they're trying to make it seem like me and this person both have the same weight in this conversation. This centers a lot around gender, sexuality, race, where people are like, if they are trying to have me sit at a table with the person who disrespects me, then the leader is also part of the problem. And I think that we have to be able to understand that we have leaders who are trying to represent whole groups of people who come from so many different types of backgrounds and cultures. And what they're trying to do is bring us together to have conversations. And instead of seeing them as lukewarm when they're working towards unity, we have to see that as the first base level of the goal is just to be unified on a few things. And then we can start to have deeper conversations about the rest of the things. And it's just so difficult for people to hold back on what they want and what they think will be the best thing that leads to thriving for them or their group of people, to start talking about something that feels so basic. But we have to start there because we're not unified there. We're never going to get unified on specific policies if we can't even be unified on what makes us human or what makes us worthy of respect or what makes us valuable as people. And so, we're worried about this specific law or this specific ordinance or whatever it is, but we haven't even sat down at the table to say, I respect you as a human. I respect you as a member of my community. I respect you because you also live in the same place I live, and start there. And we're trying so hard to get to the second, third, and fourth goal, and we haven't even hit the first, and we just skip over that.
Kori, I think you're right. I think you're so right. And I think it's not just our declarations. I think it's also in how we address situations. I think if we would even address one another in a way that sets up the most respectful way to to engage the conversation, I think that would also open some doors with people who might be defensive only because they don't believe that they have any entrance. Hey, you all, we've covered a lot, and I just want everybody to kind of give us maybe your last strong point about defeating division in America, because we've covered a lot of things that I think are super helpful, whether someone has an office and has influence over the whole state or the whole country, right down to the mom, dad, or college student who wants to make a difference in the spaces where they live.
Yeah, it's been super hard for me to just sit here and be quiet and let you guys share. Oh man, I was soaking it up. But a practical step, I think, is for leaders to realize something that I've shared with, it's not me sharing it, I believe it's just a truth, and that is, to whom much is given, much is required. And I'm hoping that any leader that's listening to me, listening to this podcast rather, is realizing that I've got lots of people that follow me that their actions hinge on my every word. So be careful what it is that you're saying and how you influence people. There are some conversations that should happen perhaps in your bedroom with your spouse or in a small room. But when you get that microphone and you get at the pulpit, or you get at your platform that you speak from, be careful about that messaging. Bounce it off of some people that maybe don't necessarily agree, so that they could help you. Be careful with that. The second thing that I would add is, for those of us that are not leaders, that we would message our leaders and say, hey, I don't necessarily agree with that. And I'm telling you, I don't believe very many of us will do that. We will, if we belong to that party, if we belong to that tribe, would we ever say, but I think that's going a bit too far. Have we considered this? I believe we would help our leaders to lead better if we would not necessarily challenge them, but if we just help them to understand that I give you my voice or my permission to push back on that. Because what we know, I hope we all know, there is nothing that either political party, if we use in politics, or if it's gender or whatever, there's nothing that we have all the answers to, or our position is 100% correct, or biblical or whatever. I don't know about that. And let's be careful and understand that to whom much is given, much is
Lee, that's just a powerful, powerful point. Thank you so much. The microphone has a responsibility, and that's just really rich to say, hey, we're influencing people, and maybe let's try to set a new standard to say everything that we say is going to move the needle for generations to come. John Mark.
I'll just say one vocabulary word that I think we need to recover is the word magnanimous. So if we're talking about the virtues of civility, to be magnanimous means I'm gracious and humble and respectful even in victory. And part of what that word is signifying, if you want to get real deep on it, you can go see what Thomas Aquinas or Joseph Pieper says about magnanimous. But here's a simple way. If somebody wins a championship in their sport and they stand up and say, hey, those other guys were so great. If it was another day, they might have beat us. They pushed me to my limit. I'm going to have to work hard all off season to come back and challenge them. Every team that we faced all year helped us get to where we are. That's magnanimous. That's magnanimous. And what that is trying to communicate is that humility and respect for the other side is a sign of strength, whereas disrespect for the other side, disrespectful language, is a sign of weakness and insecurity. So to be magnanimous is to recognize being strong, being a winner means being humble and respectful.
Oh, there's more to come on the rest of our series called Be the Dream. But John Mark, you guys are putting these thoughts out here. I'm afraid of what Kori's going to say now, because it makes us want to just keep going. But that's such a rich point, and it reminded me of listening to a Mike Tyson interview. Now, if you just want to say boxing and fierce and driving fear into the bones of human beings, just say the name Iron Mike Tyson. And it was interesting that in one of his interviews, he said, you know, I knew when I had the guy beat. I knew when I drove that last blow. And he said, I probably could have nearly killed the person. He said, but that man's family is watching. His kids are watching. They were cheering for him. Once it's over, it's over. You know, it's done. You know, who could do a death stare like Mike Tyson? Who could drive fear in you just by looking at you across the ring? I mean, he tore Michael Spinks up from the inside out before he did that 1.5-minute victory. Yet, even in a champion who could win at his level, I was shocked when I found out that when he did have full control of how he handled himself, his goal was always to leave the person with as much dignity as possible and simply decisively win.
The humanity of a pugilist.
Humanity.
Of a pugilist. I fight for a living. And he has humanity. And yet, I don't have gloves and I don't have that magnanimity.
That's our word for this episode right now. Kori, take us home. What do you have?
I think what John Mark is saying is so important. It's not even just having graciousness in victory. It's also knowing that as you seek victory, that you're not seeking harm.
Yeah.
Whoa,
and I think that's the piece
I
that
knew it was coming.
is hard for me to like not want to say all of the time to people, is a decision that I think is going to be best for me may also cause harm to somebody else. And so I need to take that into account when I'm making that decision, even if it's something as simple as I want to get to where I'm going faster. And so I'm going to speed and cut someone off. What harm could I cause to that person? I thought about this the other day because I was driving from Texas back to Oklahoma, and there's just these long stretches of space where it would be so easy to go so fast. And there was a car next to me and a car right behind me that I could tell was just itching to me get out of the way so they could cut that car off. So I moved over to the lane. The car comes in front of the other car, and the person driving did not notice how close they were. And so they hit their brakes super hard and it popped their tire and their car spun out and that car had sped on. Tiny decisions that we make can have an effect on somebody else's life. So when I'm making big decisions, I need to know the weight of how many people that could affect, whether I'm in leadership or whether I'm the leader of my neighborhood or whether I'm just a person existing in a church or a workspace or a school. My actions matter to the broader group of people. So if we don't see ourselves as a part of community and we don't see all the decisions we make as being part of a net that moves, then we'll never understand what it looks like to move from division to unity. Division is not stagnant and unity is not stagnant. It takes tension to hold division and it takes tension to hold unity. They have to be fought for. So if we're not fighting for unity, we're fighting for division, even if we don't realize it. And I think that's the space where we really have to get people to understand unity is not just a state of being, it's an action. It's continuous action to move towards unity, to hold unity, to keep unity. And that is the work that Dr. King called us into, and it's the work that you're calling us into. It's the work that Lee and John Mark are working towards in all the spaces that they're in. And so in order for us to do that, we have to know that it's going to take work, but that when we do that work together, the goal is so much more achievable. And the weight of that responsibility is not just mine, it's everyone's.
That is golden, Kori. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think about that term because that little decision driving down the highway that chooses to care about someone else than just my own goals and needs doesn't seem like it adds up to anything. We want to encourage everybody who's listening that you may not think that what you're doing is influential, but just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. when you're going to make decisions, how could I make this decision in a way that's not going to add division to society, but it's going to take it away? It's going to cause someone else's children, not just mine, someone else's kids in their neighborhood, not just the kids in my neighborhood, to be able to thrive and to flourish. You all, we want to thank you so much for being a part of this episode of Be the Dream. If you haven't heard some solutions to defeating the division today, then you need to call me up. We need to go to lunch and we're just going to sit there together and listen to this episode over again. Hey, we want to thank you. Hey, check us out. Help us spread this message. That's our goal. We want more and more people to be able to find language, to build bridges, to bring down walls of division, to help raise the dignity of everybody, and to see the dream that Dr. King talked about. Thanks for joining us.